Alex, you have a rather unique situation in Amarillo, so I want you to go ahead and lay it out. And thanks for coming in to do, because it's an important point of what we should be considering in the future. Go ahead, Alex.
I emailed the presentation, but I also killed a couple trees and printed it out for you. So yes, sir, Chairman Betancourt, thank you for having me and the rest of the committee. I am a citizen, that's all, taxpayer. I live in Amarillo. I'm a businessman there. I do have a dispute in the form of a lawsuit with the city of Amarillo that's got a little bit of attention. A trial set for first week in October, so just a few weeks from now. And I was asked to come and kind of talk about what's happening in Amarillo as relates to the potential for abuse for non-voter approved debt instruments like COs and tax notes. I'll just say tax notes. In November 2020, Amarillo City Council put forth a general obligation bond election to build a new arena and civic center renovation of about $270 million. The project did not pass by about 60-40 vote. They really wanted to move forward, and so they went out and looked for a public-private partnership option, which took about a year. That was from around January, February 2021 until about February, March 2022. That effort came back empty. No takers on a private mechanism to fund a project like this. So they were a little bit stuck. They couldn't go do a CO because you have to wait for 3 years. Thank you for that work. That gives a little bit of pause if voters have said no. Of course, they weren't going to go back to voters. And they resolved to go ahead on May 24th of this year. They voted in an ordinance to take on $260 million of debt in a tax anticipation note, Ordinance 7985. To give a little context, I'm on page 2 to that anticipation note, the size of it. I had never heard of one until this May time when I heard. All I knew was we had said no to this, or most people had said no, and they were going somehow ahead with it. This $260 million, if it goes forward, will be the largest tax note in the history of the state of Texas by a little over 4 times. The biggest one ever before now is $60 million by the city of San Antonio. That $60 million in a budget market like San Antonio, which is almost 10 times the size of Amarillo, would be about $7 million. We did $260 million. Our $260 million relative to the size of our market in San Antonio would be $2.2 billion. And to pay for it, because they got to pay for it in 7 years, because tax anticipation notes have limited terms that they can borrow the money, they would have had to double our tax rate to pay for it. The 7th year of the note would have cost as much money as we collect completely in ad valorem taxes in Amarillo in a year. It wouldn't have, first year might have been 60%, but by the end would have been 100%. Even though the tax note, Government Code 1431 requires them to impose the tax that day, they didn't have to raise any taxes, because I'm going to go ahead to page 3, and I'm going to skip all the way to the bottom. What happened that day on May 24th is, in a single vote, with no public hearing and no second reading, the Amarillo City Council voted to more than double Amarillo's ad valorem tax-supported debt. What they didn't tell us on that day was that they never intended to pay that tax note off. It's a 7-year note. They can't pay it off. They wouldn't have enough money. What they planned to do was, the first payment in the arrangement they made with Frost Bank was not due until 2024. What they plan to do in March 2023 is to refinance that tax note with a refunding bond, which will give them the ability to borrow the money for 30 years. So even though we said no in 2020, what they've done is a little bit of a two-step process. In Amarillo, people are starting to call this the new Texas two-step, where they take money through a tax note, an amount of money they have no ability to pay back. But before they owe any money, they'll refinance with a refunding bond. They don't have to ask taxpayers for refunding bonds. Taxpayers have no ability to petition or argue. And in my opinion, what has happened is Amarillo is laying out for the entire state of Texas a roadmap for how to go around voters if you want to raise a bunch of money, like a bunch of money. We're not talking about $8 million or $10 million. We're talking 260. Our entire budget in 2022 was only $400 million at 65% of our entire budget. So, in short, they're looking for a way to avoid any voter accountability with a two-step process to incur debt. I filed a lawsuit soon after. That lawsuit will be heard, of course, in the next few weeks. They've taken several steps to not produce evidence, not do discovery, be in a hurry. Tried to task me with a $5 million bond requirement. Probably hoping we couldn't go forward. We've kind of withstood all those things, and we'll fight this out in a couple weeks in Amarillo. And so Amarilloans' hair are generally on fire, as you might imagine. But I came here today because I think there's a lot of people across the state, city councils looking, saying, wow, it's that easy to raise this kind of money. We don't have to ask taxpayers. There's nothing they can do about it. So I have a very gently put a page in here on recommendations, but I'm going to pause there and let you ask any questions that you might have.
Alex, you don't by chance have this on a thumb drive, do you? Or
I emailed it to...
okay, well, he's working on that to try to bring it up. I think the audience would be very interested in this if they can see it. Okay, so let me summarize this. You've got a major jurisdiction in the state, Amarillo, voted down a bond election for a new civic center. Okay, so they didn't want to wait 3 years because we put that prohibition in. You couldn't release the CO. So to wire around it, they went and incurred a tax anticipation note.
Yes, sir.
Of $260 million, which is a blockbuster because it's huge. It's off the charts. We've seen, I think, I'm not sure that the data that you have there is up to date, but that's well in excess of anything we've ever seen. So they release it. They issue a TAN, and look, as the author's intent of SB2, I believe this is imposing a tax. Okay, because I think that's why it's. I hope in this case your lawsuit is successful, because this is such an extraordinary attempt to wire around SB2. And it's going to have real implications in the state, and not only to the citizens of Amarillo, if this type of process can happen. Because basically what they've done is they've taken a short-term instrument, which is tax anticipation notes, and then now, I just heard for the first time, they're going to convert it into a refinancing for a 30-year bond.
Yes, sir.
Now, what is the current INS rate of Amarillo? Do you know the interest in sinking?
I don't know, but that's going to be a tricky part of our suit, because our first thought was, even if they do a refunding bond for 30 years, they still have to raise the tax rate by 35% even to pay for that. And so we thought that doesn't fit over the M&O, under the M&O limit of 3.5%. And we thought that would be an easy stop. But what they did was another painfully well thought out little tricky thing, was to be sure that all this debt lands on the INS side. They went to a tiers board 3 weeks before they voted this $260 million, and they talked the tiers board into adding this project to that tiers. And that way, if it's in a tiers project, they can put it over on the INS side. And in that meeting with the Tiers board, they didn't tell them in 3 weeks we're gonna move to spend $260 million on this kind of project. They just said, well, generally, we're just kind of cleaning things up and taking advantage of some things we need to. And 3 weeks later, they put it over there, and now they're like, oh, well, it's over on the INS side. We just raised. The worst thing is they're not going to raise taxes because in May, I don't know if they're going to be in office. And future city councils are going to have to cover that $260 million debt over there on the INS side. So it's just a painful set of bait and switch, end around, however you want to call it.
Okay, so basically, this is your slide on this TAN being over $250 million. It's not voter approved. Okay, the TERS, another interesting topic. Put it on a project list, so therefore it goes on the INS side instead of the M&O side, which would have blown their budget to pieces.
Yes, sir.
You see the equivalence of how big this is. This is a huge TAN for a city this size. It is. It's a whopper.
Yes,
okay. Now, somebody has to pay a tax anticipation note. That's once you incur that debt, you have to pay it. So next slide. And so basically what we've got here is then that gets flipped. Go ahead, hit next slide. Move it to the next slide. Then you flip that to with a refinancing tool, and no matter what happens, somebody has to pay that.
Right. They intend to pay it. They've said they intend to pay it with ad valorem taxes.
And even though the public voted this down 61-39.
Yes, sir.
Wow, the extraordinary lengths, Bill, what some of your members will go through to make a project that, like this, happened in convolution of all common sense, because these are poster childs of why laws get passed and get changed. But I still think, and I have not seen your presentation there is clearly no, as somebody who, as the author of SB, there's no fact or supposition of fact that they're not trying to impose a tax here. Somebody has to pay this, okay? And it's going to be paid with tax revenues. There's no question about it. We did have a major debate about COs, and a portion of COs are now covered under the truth in taxation.
Right.
But again, what we're trying to do is give out top-down guidelines for people to make rational decisions with the tools they've got. But bringing back a project that is that failed the public 61-39 in less than 3 years, and using a TAN, a $250 million TAN, which has never occurred in the state before, and then using a TERS to try to force it onto the INS side of the books, and then flip it with a 30-year. It means there's not, a chance for the folks to be heard.
Yes, sir.
And that is preposterously bad public policy. Questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Springer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And and then you just sort of finished up when you said, they may be leaving. And so it's the swan song for any court, or any council that the majority is going to be leaving is like, what legacy project do we want, to tag our deals onto that we never have to ask? They'll never go out for a vote again if we allow this to stay there. It's like, if we want to build any massive project, why would we ask the voters? We can just run it through this faster, quicker, easier. Don't have to run an election from that aspect. And I appreciate your, recommendations because, the middle one you said, possibly assess as a percentage of the budget what a TANs could be. Because, that's thinking through it rather than just saying kill it and eliminate it, because it's been a tool that, as he said, Antonio on there, and they've used it and nobody's complained.
Right.
And so it's a valuable tool. So rather than taking the tool out of the toolbox, you make a great recommendation that says maybe it needs to be right-sized in there, that you really can't be over a certain one. So I appreciate that recommendation in there.
Other questions? Senator Eckhart.
This is definitely this is an example of that should definitely be looked at. But I want to also pose an example that worked, that was the exact same mechanism. just so that we have an idea that this is not always the case. And it's an example from my own experience. Travis County went out to bond $287 million for a new courthouse after purchasing a piece of property for más o menos $50 million. The bond failed. Travis County then went forward on a public-private partnership on a different piece of property, leased the property they bought at a considerable advantage to the county. They made more on the 99-year ground lease than it cost to purchase the dirt. They moved to a different piece of property on a public-private partnership and built the courthouse, which is opening this fall, on budget, on schedule, for what will probably be less than the bonded project would have been, considering time value of money. So this mechanism can be used well. I understand the concern about going around voter approval, but the state doesn't build courthouses. The state doesn't build schools. And we can't function without them. I think we could function without a amenity center, a civic center. But there are bricks and mortar infrastructure we absolutely have to have, even when a bond fails. And locals look for a different way to deliver when they can't deliver in the methodology that we have provided initially, because we can't go on without this infrastructure. So again, let's look for partnership with our locals to understand the challenges that they're facing, so that we don't have unintended consequences and get to a good place with regard to good stewardship of the tax dollar. We're all looking for good stewardship of the tax dollar. Locals are not universally evil, running around looking for ways to squander your money. That will get you unelected pretty quick. So thank you for bringing this example. I just wanted to bring another example to the table, and I'm happy to give you stats on that project if you would like to have them, and give you a tour of the new county courthouse when it opens.
Senator Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a good thing about this. There's always more than one perspective on things. To me, there is no higher bar set than the public's opinion in a vote. When the public takes a vote on something, that should be the end of it, because we experienced the same thing in my district in Rockwall County, where the public twice voted down a bond for a courthouse, and they found a way to get around it. And in this example that was given there, just think if we'd listened to the people, did what they wanted, done the same lease, Travis County may have been able to lower some property tax with all the extra money they would have had in there. And so I think that it's incumbent upon us to get things back in perspective and understand that we in government are not the Lord Almighty in charge of making things happen, but we are servants of the people. And when the people speak, whether they speak right or not in our mind, we are obligated to listen to them and do what they want, because the consequences are on them, not on us. If there's something that it was in somebody's opinion truly needed, there will be consequences of not doing it, and those that made the decision not to do it will suffer those consequences. And so my feeling is when it happens and there's a vote taken, that should be the end of it. And may come back around again when they realize that that the building is crumbled or something, whatever it is, happens. Then the people can decide whether it's worth it to them to have their taxes raised once again, because every bond out there raises taxes, whether you want to talk about an increase on a monthly or yearly basis or not. Just like we tried to get on the election, a bond being passed is an increase in taxes to the people. And so we need to have it so that if the people speak, if we aren't smart enough to listen to them, then we ought to figure out a way to get the law so that we have to listen to them. Just my perspective.
Okay. Senator Eckhart, you missed that we already established three things. One, we're now in the 21st century and we're using the screens. Two, that things were going to be highly debatable today, okay? And three, there would be no lack of opinions, okay? And we are preparing the audience for such, okay? Because when they approach the bar, okay, well, you're the lawyers, okay? So anyway, Mr. Jeremy, since you've got to run to catch a plane, so if you anything you'd like to add, but I appreciate you bringing this because this is it's not even an outlier. This is like an extension to a vanishing point on what you can do with a $250 million TAN. So thank you for
having me and working with my schedule.
All right, thank you so much. All right, let's bring up now some of the appraisal districts, Texas Association of Appraisal Districts. Jordan Watt.